Welcome, everyone, to this session organized by the JB Scholars Professional Development Forum. This is a session that we'll be discussing on applications to PhD positions in US universities. And there are two panelists for this session. One is Professor Ananya Sen Gupta. She is an assistant professor at University of Iowa, and she is a JBNSTS scholar from 1995. The other panelist is myself, and I am Debarghya Sarkar, or Debarghya Sarkar, and I am a JBNSTS scholar from 2010. I recently graduated with my PhD from USC, and I'm currently a postdoc at Harvard University / MGH, Massachusetts General Hospital. So I think with that, I'll let Professor Sen Gupta take over and express her views in general, and then we'll take questions from the audience.
First of all, thank you, Debarghya, for taking the initiative for organizing such a big event. And I appreciate your energy and passion in this. And I'm thrilled to be part of this. So I'm going to talk only a little bit about my research because that's not what this is about. But at the same time, it's helpful to know what I do. So what I do in a nutshell is applied mathematics with some applied statistics. And typically that is to understand and discover patterns in environmental processes. So just to use some jargon out there, anything I do falls within the scope of signal processing, pattern recognition, some machine learning, but it's all applied to either matters of the ocean, like how sound propagates under the ocean, how can we communicate under the ocean, or say if you have big contamination event like an oil spill, how do you fingerprint the signature, the chemical signature of oil from oil spills? Or let's say in space, in our radiation belts, there are high energy events, and there are terabytes of mission data. So, big data is another buzzword that interfaces with what I do. So anytime you have large amounts of data, or you have very small amounts of data over which machine learning cannot easily turn the crank, and then you really need to not only find patterns, half the times the models are not known, and you have to kind of discover the patterns. So that discovery has to be led by the science rather than completely autonomous systems. So that is where the signal processing comes in. So anything I do is typically done in very close collaboration with scientists from different disciplines. So I work with military scientists, I work with space scientists, I work with chemists. Sometimes I work with microbiologists, so that is a very small part of my work, more on the fringe that I was very privileged to do. So that's different. So anyhow, that in a nutshell, what I do is a lot of applied math applied to experimental field data. And that's the main thing, that it is not theory, it is very much practice. And I live right at the intersection of the theory and the practice. That's what excites me. But what I wanted to talk today is how, on the application side, when you're looking to graduate school, how do you know first which schools to apply? How do you basically make your case shine among the many applicants who apply to different places? Also, in a way, when do you start the process? And I think that's where I can give a little bit of perspective, because the application deadline is that deadline. But, when do you start? The networking has to start long before, which is also why, Debarghya, I'm very happy to see the timing of how you put things, because this is right now when everybody is preparing. Faculty are just looking ahead on whether and who they want to hire in fall 2021. And right when faculty are in this thought space is the right time to hear from potential students to test them out, because in an ideal situation, what you really want is a faculty member who has a new grant starting, let's say in fall 2021, and looking for a PhD student to get in the radar of such a faculty member and have an advocate like, yes, I do want this student. I've not only interviewed this student, we have interacted back and forth. I totally see this student as my future graduate student. I'm going to make this happen. Right. So that's where you really want the networking to land in, and preferably, with the faculty of your choice and the institution of your choice. And so I'm not saying it has to be that way, but I'm saying that is the win-win situation where both the faculty and the student have already found their fit even before the student is applying. Now, of course, that is not the usual situation. So I'm just first looking at the two extremes, right? You can tell I'm an applied mathematician. I'm looking at the upper bound and the lower bound. So I just gave you the upper bound, right? Now, the lower bound is you blindly apply, because that's what I did years ago. I didn't know any better. You blindly apply everywhere with the same generic application by the deadline. And you unfortunately spend all your hard-earned pocket money paying the application fees. You don't write to anybody. And then it all goes into some different black holes, and you cross your fingers and you hope something comes up. That's it. That's exactly what I did. And I landed up in UIUC, which is a pretty good place. So, so it's not that that's a bad thing to do. But I would like to say there's a long gray area between these two extremes. And I think that should be the scope of the discussion. And I see a chat. Hello, Swastik. Okay, so I would rather like to have the ball go back and forth, Debarghya, between you and others, because I am not very good at giving a monologue, particularly if I'm not sure whether, whether what I'm saying is useful to others or not.
Sure. So maybe if we start from, let's say, when a potential PhD applicant who is probably in his or her undergraduate or master's in some cases, if we have this question, let's say you have different applications, and what would you be looking at? What are some of the key aspects in the application file that needs to stand out, that you would want to select a certain applicant over the others?
So there are several things. First, there's the technical part. Let me go over this. That in the technical part, let's say within my field, given what I just described. So anybody who works in my group has to live and breathe in MATLAB, maybe Python and other software things that are typically platforms that are used for analysis of experimental field data, right? So if a student basically says, I have done intense MATLAB projects, I know Python like the back of my hand, that automatically means, okay, great, I don't have to train the student to code in that, right? But that is very specific to me. But then, MATLAB is something that is typical research software, most people do.
I guess what we can sort of generalize is if someone has the tools or the skills for the specific application, that gives a boost to the application.
Right. So this is, by the way, that's not an academic skill. That's a software skill. But the thing is, research is not like a homework problem. So you may be very good in theory, but to actually do research, there is a lot of software training that happens on the job, right? And that is where I can tell you as faculty, I have had to hold the hands of very otherwise book smart students and teach them how to debug their MATLAB script right, believe it or not. And then sometimes I have actually had to hire an undergrad who is very invested in the software because there I can trust that the thing will get debugged well. So I'm saying these are different skill sets. Just because somebody has the perfect GRE score or, has done really well in your college exams and have a good GPA does not necessarily mean that person has that kind of skill set. So first, I'm just going through the bullet points of the skill set. There are software skills. Of course, there is academic knowledge and skills. So that is where, honestly, when I'm looking at a prospective student's file, I usually skip over everything and go straight to the reference letters and try to see, are the reference letters just boilerplate, or is there something that shines out? So, and I can tell you I'm not exceptional in that case. Most people, the reference letters matter. And this is where, if the reference letter is too boilerplate, that I had so-and-so student in my class, did blah, 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 got this grade, wish him or her well. And that does not give more information besides just the GPA is good. And that I can look up anyway, right? So the thing about GPA matters and it also doesn't matter. It's like the credit score. So if it is low, then it's a flag. If that makes sense, right? So if it's low, at least for me, it's not a deal breaker for me. Then I get curious why. And that's when I am extra careful reading the reference letter. Typically, most of the prospectives, they have decent GPA. And by decent GPA, I mean like 3.5 out of a scale of 4 or higher. I have seen students with the GPA lower than that apply. Typically below 3.0 is no admit. That happens at the committee level. So please make sure your GPA stays 3.5 or higher out of a scale of 4. Now, different Indian institutions may not have their GPA in a scale of 4. Then the burden is on the applicant to translate that into a 4.0 GPA. And you can just do your weighted scaling or what have you. I mean, that's fine too. But oftentimes what happens is when we get a lot of perspectives, the admin professionals, the departmental secretary is going to make all these notes and make a file and things like that, right? And we'll get an Excel sheet with the student's GPA and GRE scores and things like that, right? So numbers matter.
If I sort of interrupt you a bit with a couple of questions regarding this GPA and the reference letters. So to my knowledge, also when I applied, the GPA, so this is something that I heard from other professors as well, whom I had interviewed with and who I currently have very good relations, although I didn't go to that professor eventually, but we collaborated later. So I heard from him about what his perspectives are on accepting students. And he also said that GPA is important. So the number which you mentioned, 3.4 or 3.5 on a scale of 4, when I applied to different universities, their application also mentioned this, that you don't try to translate yourself if yours is on a different scale. Let's say I'm from Jalfur University, or I was from Jalfur University, so mine was on a scale of 10. So I had to report on a scale of 10. So if I may ask you, I guess you may also receive applications on scale of 10. So roughly what would be a GPA that you think is acceptable there? Maybe for the benefit of people here.
Right. So this is where I also see a chat asking the same question. So I'll be honest with you. I was from Jadavpur. Jadavpur at that time did a scale of 5.
Okay.
So I reported my GPA on a scale of 5. I've completely forgotten whatever it was. And then I said blah on a scale of 5. And I said translating to 4.0 scale was that. And I basically did your ratios thing. So I gave the actual GPA. And then in parentheses, I wrote on a scale of 4, this is what it would translate to. I have no idea whether people laughed at my application and ignored my translation or not, but the information was there. And a couple of things, I guess I should tell this up front. Yes, I'm a professor, but I have never been part of the graduate admissions committee in my department or anywhere else. Okay, so the only recruiting decisions about graduate students I have done are for my research team. Okay, so it might be worthwhile for you if we get a chance to see if there are JB scholars who have actually served in graduate admissions committee. Now that's it, just because I'm faculty and I talk to people in our graduate admissions committee, I get idea and I look at students' files all the time, right? So I can tell you what I do if I see a GPA in a different scale. I mentally basically see, would it translate to something like 3.5 or above in a 4.0 scale? And right. Yes, it's just a linear ratio thing, but it's a ballpark. And this is where I know I am different from several of my colleagues. I have colleagues who take the GPA super seriously. I take it as a flag thing. Like if somebody has an unusually low GPA, that's a flag. But I personally do not distinguish between, say, somebody having a 3.63 GPA and somebody having a 3.95 GPA. Okay. And the reason I don't, because all the GPA measures is how did this person do competitively in college courses, which may or may not matter in the research they're going to do with me.
Right. So, sorry.
That's okay. I also see some chats. Should we contact the professor before applying to the graduate school? Absolutely. I'm going to come to that. That's the part where
if we sort of complete this discussion first. So another question in this perspective was that the scaling or the grading in U.S. universities is always, at least what I know, is on a relative scale. So if the highest is, let's say, 9 out of 10 points in the exam, then that's sort of taken as the A or 4.0. And then there's a relative curving, which is also dependent on the professor, how they want to curve. But many universities, including Jalfrey University even today, they do an absolute grading.
Yes.
So let's say if my application goes to Professor Ananya Sen Gupta, she may know that Jalfrey University or many Indian universities will be doing an absolute scaling, but many professors don't. So do you think, in addition to, does the CV in that sense make a platform for the applicant to say that, what's their rank, or some other way of telling, for example, my GPA, I'm telling publicly, was 8.9 out of 10, which is actually low compared to many, even Indian universities, like many IITs, and definitely low if I want to compete and get into good schools in the US. So how do I make that make it through that? Let's say my GPA is actually the highest in my department.
Right. So this is where I would say there are two things. One is talk to your professors, because almost I would say the burden is not only on the student applicant, but also on the letter writers to explain this. This is where, yes, as the student, you should put some clarifying, in my case, without knowing any better, I just did a linear translation. I don't think that's the best thing to do, but you can explain. If you have a rank, then explain, so-and-so percentile in a graduating class of blah, right? You can add that as a quantitative fact, right? And even add that typically we don't, in my institution, doesn't grade on a curve. Exactly what you said, put that in brackets or something, but also talk to the professors and have them almost shine that in their letter. Because I can tell you that for me, the GPA is mostly to make sure the student is not a complete dud. That's the degree to which I care about it. And I have colleagues who care more. I personally find that there is no real big difference between an A+ and somebody who even got a B or B minus in a particular couple of courses that are completely irrelevant to the student's research with me, right? And so therefore, all it takes is 2 to 3 courses to get a B or B minus to really pull down a student's GPA, right?
Sure.
And those courses may have absolutely no bearing on my research program, right? And I don't have that scope because I may not see the whole transcript. Even if I do, I don't have hours and hours of time to figure out which are those courses among all the applicants I see, right? So GPA to me is a ballpark way of making sure a student is not a complete dud, because only somebody who really does badly in majority of their courses is going to get a really bad GPA, right?
Right.
So there's that part. But then the thing is, just contacting, this is where it actually relays in, just contacting the professor is not enough, in my opinion, because the first people who actually gets an applicant's application and look at it is the graduate admissions committee, which is typically maximum of maybe 4 or 5 faculty, I would think. And typically, departments are much bigger than that, right? So the professor you may want to work with may not be part of that admissions committee.
Mm-hmm.
And those are closed door meetings, okay? That's what I as a faculty can tell my colleagues. So-and-so applicant is applying, I want that person, okay? But I don't have any say to what the graduate admissions committee is going to decide looking at that. And that's the second reason why GPA matters, okay? Because that is why I'm putting 3.5 on a scale of 4 is a safe GPA where you would not have the admissions committee throw out an application. Okay, think of it as a screen more than anything else. Okay, now whether that a student gets admitted after that is a much more complex question. And that is also where I cannot emphasize enough how important is it that the letter writers don't write a boilerplate. And this is where personally I sometimes think that our college professors back home don't necessarily know unless they have been here. And some professors even have I know because I read these letters, they have like a template where they have these things and then they're switching the students' names, right?
Yeah.
And that does not tell me anything individual about the student, right?
Exactly. Yeah, no, I definitely, I have faced that in different ways, not necessarily from my case, but from my friends. And that's true, that the letter writing is an important thing. And like you said, and I know for a fact as well, that it gives the sort of a very good perspective that US professors in the US rely on, which is not what most Indian professors think. So essentially, to summarize, I think what we can say about the GPA and what it stands out, if in some way or the other, or maybe multiple ways, the student has to, project their achievements in a positive light. So it could be in the statement of purpose and the CV and the letter of recommendation. So they need to somehow make it through that their GPA, in whichever scale it is knowing the fact that it's probably on an absolute scale, what that actually means. So that's something, because not every decision, like as you also said, not every decision finally depends on one professor. It depends on many things, which makes things complex. So, right. So from here, if we move over to how important, how do you see statements of purposes and CVs?
Right. So statement of purposes is also another thing I read. But to be honest with you, most undergraduates in India, though that is slowly changing, don't really have hands-on research experience, which many US graduate prospectives actually do. And so oftentimes the statement of purposes come off again as boilerplate, that I want to work on everything under the sun and I have done well in my courses. Give me a chance and I'll prove myself. And I understand and relate to that because I too did not necessarily get any real opportunity to do research as an undergraduate. And one of the things that I will say as a mentor to many undergraduate researchers as well as graduate researchers is research is not the same as coursework. That I cannot iterate enough, because coursework is about milestones and deadlines and specific assignments that a professor gives, right? And how you can digest a material and be able to answer questions quickly in a timed exam. That is what coursework is. In some sense, coursework is like running a sprint, like running a 100-meter sprint. Your muscles are strong enough, you're trained enough that you want to reach the ending line before others and get your A+. Right. Research is a marathon.
Right.
It's about endurance. It's about not knowing answers and not BSing. That is important. Not trying to show my results are shinier than they actually are. Being able to self-critique, then wait for the professor to find the flaws. And also having the courage to find where is the core challenge? Why is this problem difficult? Why has others not looked at it this way before? So it is a kind of not just self-critique, but also understanding where is the missing link in the current body of knowledge. Now, this is what research is about. So when I'm going with all of this, your statement of purpose has to show that you're capable of touching these bullet points, capable of thinking in this way. So what you can simply talk about in research is surely you do some course project somewhere, or maybe you did an internship. The internship doesn't have to be in a research institution, but these are soft skills. These are not technical skills. These are soft skills. But if somebody reads it, and also I'll be honest, nobody has time to read 5-page statement of purposes. Okay, but the soft skills are resilience, ability to, pay attention to detail, ability to be your fiercest critique, right? And ability to be independent, to be an independent thinker. Because nobody wants a high maintenance graduate student who cannot do anything and constantly needs being given assignments. Because if I have to continuously tell my PhD student, no, go read that paper, no, wrong paper, go read that paper, then it's easier for me, to be honest, to sit down and do the research myself than if I have to constantly tell my student what to do, right? So there is that. So all of these things need to somehow come out in the statement of purpose, because there is no GPA for this.
Right. So I guess, so I had also, taken the opportunity to mentor some people along these lines. And what I told them was, and you can, give your opinion whether that's the right thing to do or not. So I've seen that person's and also other people's SOP where they say, I'm very hardworking, I'm very resilient, and I'll critique my work, etc., etc. But instead of that, what I think needs to be put in the SOP is sort of a scientific story, if I can say that way, where through that story you won't specifically be saying that you are hardworking or that you are honest in your work or that you have failed and being resilient, but you tell few stories or give some examples and sort of intersperse them with your achievements, and through that tell the professors that you have those qualities. So do you think that's the right way of doing it?
I absolutely agree. Because, how shall I say, saying I'm resilient or saying I'm hardworking is not the same as proving that you're resilient or that proving you're hardworking, right? So that is where think of what is a project you worked on or a technical paper you worked on, even if that technical paper is a project report, okay? Anything technical that is bigger than just an assignment, okay? See if you can describe that and talk about your journey through that.
Right.
And ideally, what you'd like is one of your letter writers to be the person who mentored you in that. So what you write in your SOP resonates with that person writes in their letter. So the stories add up. That's when I know this is a genuine case. Okay. Right. Now, that may not always happen, but what I'm saying, so let me share a bit of a personal story here, because when I applied to graduate school, first of all, don't lose hope. I applied to about 30 places. Guess how many accepted me?
6.
Just one. Just one. And that was University of Illinois, Champaign-Urbana, which is one of the top places in my field. I got rejected from far lower places. One of my suspicions is they did not know how to translate my GPA.
Yeah.
Because I'm from Jadavpur, not from an IIT. They did not know what Jadavpur is, far less be able to pronounce it. And I'm talking about a time when, Indian universities were not that well known in the US except the IIT. So the fact that I was not from an IIT probably did not help. And then nobody told me how to write an SOP. So my SOP was very boilerplate because I wanted to touch everything. So, my SOP was, I want to work on everything. So that combination probably did not sell very well, but there were two things. One is I wrote to all the professors that I could find in every place I applied to. And there again, I did not really have the right type of mentorship. So my emails were huge, essentially a copy of my SOP. Nobody reads huge emails. Nobody has that time. And they were very generic because, again, I wanted to touch everything. And therefore, I touched nothing, right? And nobody responded. And then eventually I got very flustered and I kept sending the same emails. And then exactly one professor who is extremely well known in his field from UIUC responded because he just got intrigued because the emails themselves were not very interesting to him, but the fact that I would not give up was intriguing to him. And so he wrote back and said, yes, I looked at your application. It looks interesting. This is how I know. He said, I have had students from IIT, but I don't know your home institution. And then this is where in my, arrogance and at that point, desperation of being an undergraduate, who was barely in my 20s, I said, yes, everybody thinks it's only IITs that have the good students. Here, you don't have to know where I come from. Just give me problems to solve, and I'll solve them, and you will judge for yourself. And I basically said, challenge me. If you think I'm a dud, let me prove myself. And that really intrigued him, that there is this nobody from India writing to him who is a very famous scientist and just asking him to challenge me back. And I said, okay, here's a problem. Just work on it. I want to see how we'll solve it. So I started to work, and it was like several times a day, I'm going back and forth on a technical problem with this professor who has never met me, and I have never met him. And that's when he was convinced that I have the resilience, I have the passion, I have the independence, and also I believe the way he put it later, that I dared to ask questions, that I was not intimidated at the idea of working with or talking to somebody famous. But I did not know that I was so naive, I did not even know he was famous, but that's a different story.
Right. So, I mean, that's a really good anecdote. And, I would say maybe, things working this way are great, but I guess not everyone is really lucky that way. It's really good that it worked for you, and yes. Maybe bad that you had the arrogance to take forth your flag and prove yourself. So that was great. So we spoke about the importance of the statements of purpose, and the letters of recommendation. Now, here is the thing. So as we know that, many professors, not most, like honestly, the professors whom I got their letters from in my department, those specific professors, they knew about the process and they had recommended many students in the past. So they weren't in this, sort of arena of most other professors. But I also had I was fortunate to also have a letter of recommendation from a professor in the US, because I was able to do an internship in a US university while I was in an undergrad. So, and one of my interviewers, like a professor at a university, she did not accept me finally, but I asked her, could you please give me feedback about why you did not accept me? And then I can probably use this to better my interviews later to get a chance there. So what she said was, not everything is in your hands. We tend to trust so she said, we tend to trust the GPA of people who do their undergraduate in US universities, because we understand the structure of education here. And the other thing is we also trust the letters of recommendation from our US counterparts. Now, and the other thing was those who could explain their research well in the interview. So I said, well, okay, maybe, I went somewhere wrong in the research, in the interview part, because I did have a letter from a US professor. But how do you think, in terms of sort of building the profile, JB scholars who are new or others, they can, it's flatly speaking, it's quite difficult to get an internship. I was really lucky to get one, mainly, I think, for two things. One, the financial part, and second, there are administrative aspects to it, like visas and stuff like that. So even if we don't go into the visa part, but how do you think, because the other thing is, if they don't have a professor whom they can say, hey, we cannot really tell a professor you should write this, because they are sort of stuck with that. So I think many Indian students they may be equally competitive with many US counterparts, but they are not making it to the to the fourth, because they are being held back because of this boilerplate.
I know exactly what you mean, and this is where, on the professor's side, over the years, I've drastically changed my recruiting procedure. And so this is entirely speaking for me. I do not speak of any other faculty. I do not speak for colleagues. But because I went through this journey on the other side of the fence now, and mind you, I have the advantage of knowing what it is, as somebody applying from India. And by the way, for those of you listening in, if you are from an IIT, please make sure it is nicely highlighted and staring in the face, because brand name institutions that people know here are going to work to your advantage. Don't be shy, because you have to use the tickets that are to your advantage and make sure they get noticed. All right. There's nothing to be shy about it. You have to beat your own drum. I'm not saying non-IIT institutions are any less competitive, but I'm saying, if your institution is already well known in the US, make sure it's not hidden somewhere for people to find out. So I am going to answer questions later. I'm seeing some relevant questions here, but I am going to tell you now, and I guess I'm giving my secrets away here, but here is how I actually recruit these days. First, I make sure there's no big flag in the GPA. So if somebody has a less than 3.5 in a scale of 4 equivalent GPA, to me, that's not an automatic reject. That means I need to be really careful on how I read the things. What I read most seriously are the letters of reference. Why? Because even if there are 3 boilerplate letters, those are from 3 different people. Okay. And I really try to see what is the common story that is coming from the 3 letters. There are usually at least 3 letters. Okay. So that gives me data. I'm a data scientist. That gives me the pattern I'm trying to discover, that what is the common pattern that these 3 people who probably did not share each other's letter with each other, saying about this one person, because that is where there is some real feel about this person. Okay. And I not only look at, that's the other thing, tell your letter writers, I not only look at what technical stuff the student did, which almost at this point, 100% of the cases had no bearing whatsoever on my research. So the technical part was only important in the sense the student was able to do and complete a project and convince the project supervisor to write a letter. Okay. And I again look for resilience, detail-oriented, and all of that. There is another thing that is important. Is this person easy to manage and pleasant to work with? Okay. And I mean that, how shall I say, by pleasant, I don't mean that the person has to be pleasing. That's very different. I mean professional to work with, does this person actually show up to meetings on time? If I give the student a deadline, is that deadline going to get seriously or get pushed down the road or what have you? And in general, can I, trust the student's results? Those are things that also don't show up in a GPA, but can show up in a letter writer, right? So that is one of the other hidden things I try to find, that is this person somebody with professional integrity. I guess that's the right phrase I'm looking for. Okay. And that too, if you write in your SOP that I have professional integrity, that proves nothing. Again, that is one of those things that can shine out in a letter writer. Okay. And so on that note, again, what is the personality of the student is something that everybody's intrigued by, because I can tell you as advisor of several PhD students at this point, that your PhD student becomes part of your academic family. It is very much a guru-disciple relationship in some way. And so you kind of need to know who are you welcoming into the family. In some ways, I'm going to, I guess, give a not very PC analogy, but it's almost like, like in an arranged marriage when the families come together and try to get to know each other. It's a very different setting, but in some sense, you are trying to make a very serious decision. It's not just a decision about funding a project.
Right.
As a professor, when I'm interviewing my future PhD student, I am interviewing my legacy. Okay. When I sign on the thesis of a PhD student that this person is now Dr. So-and-so going out into the world, that person is carrying my academic label. That is really important. Okay. And so that is why when I'm interviewing, I'm not just immediately interviewing to fill a position. I am interviewing my legacy.
Right.
That is important, right? And that is where the personality matters. Somebody can be a rock star, let's say, even as an undergrad, but maybe is really difficult to work with. Maybe has real personality issues, cannot be part of a team. If I get even a hint of that in a reference letter, that's a huge red flag.
Right.
And those things matter, because here you're not looking for somebody who's just going to do a project, shine very well, and then leave forever. Okay, what if that person leaves my group later on and gets infamous for something, right? That's my legacy too. So these things, these subliminals matter. I'm not saying that you should live in fear that somebody badmouths you in a letter that's going to help forever. All I'm saying is it's a very well-rounded, it's almost like taking a holistic approach, that I am not just interviewing a person from a field, I'm not interviewing a GPA, I'm interviewing a whole person who is also going to be a whole professional. And it's not possible to be a whole professional, in my opinion, unless you're a whole person. So that is one of those things where you have real control when you write your SOP. And what I would almost say, give you all a homework, those of you who are listening in. And I just gave the similar homework to one of my PhD students who is writing her NSF graduate research fellowship, actually. And I told her that forget everything that your professors have told you, your parents and family have told you about what you should be. Try to drown out all those voices, including my voice, and sit down and ask yourself, why am I doing this? Why will I not just take my undergraduate degree and go to Google or Amazon and make money? Why am I staying up at night and feeling passionate that I really want to go do this? First, interview yourself that, and then try to tell your life story in a way that is professional, technical, but people also see you through that essay. And I can tell you, those are the SOPs that are really valuable, because there I can see, yes, this person is somebody I can feel comfortable bringing into my fold, right?
Yeah.
Because I can tell you right now, with COVID going on and everything, the first thing that happened when COVID came to Iowa, I was calling up my graduate students and asking them if they're okay. Not about where are the deadlines or anything. I just wanted to make sure my academic family, just like my blood family, are safe and healthy and happy, and they could trust me because I'm sort of their family on campus. And I made sure I made individual several phone calls to all my students to tell them, you should know that if you need help, you can call my cell phone, and I will try my best within my limits to help you. That is how strong and deep a relationship between a PhD advisor and a PhD student can become. I'm not saying everyone does that, but that is quite typical. Having been a graduate student who was on a hotline with my PhD advisor when my father passed away halfway through my PhD in India. And I can tell you, my real family at that time, besides my own blood family in India, was my PhD advisor. Okay, so that is how strong a relationship is. It is not like just classroom professor relationship. So coming back, when somebody is looking at a prospective applicant, that is the relationship you're interviewing for. So don't just put in cold bullets of, I have done this internship, I have done this project. Yes, if you're not smart, you would not be considered anyway, right? But there is the subliminals that speak volumes. And that sometimes is what moves a student to the other side of the line.
Right.
I hope that made sense. I kind of went on a tangent.
Oh, no, sure. I mean, I guess, essentially I guess what we may say is not everything is everyone's hands, like someone else also told me. So the students must make sure whatever is in their hands, which is to write the SOP, like you described, as a story through which they can describe how fit they would be. And that doesn't necessarily mean they need to have all technical skills to cater to your research, because I think going into a PhD program should be quite of a broad mind. And it's not that one has solved a specific problem, then they can solve the problem that you'll be working with. Rather, if they have the skill set, the mindset, and the personality to be independent, as well as to be a good team member, to be resilient, and be a good person in total. So that should come out through their statement of purpose, ideally through their letters of recommendation and so on.
Yes.
So on that perspective, we've talked about the GPA. There was also a question, and my question as well, how important is GRE today?
I honestly don't know, because I look at GRE scores again, so it doesn't raise a flag. But this is where, because I have not been in admissions committee deliberations myself, whether, what is the screen cutoff number, if there is, how high is good enough or not, I honestly don't know. I can ask because I know our admissions committee chair, and I can ask. Because typically for me, if I am getting a student, I look at GPA, I make sure that GRE is not terrible, and I only honestly look at the quantitative. And the essays and stuff, not everybody's English is great. I try. One of the things I do value, if the student has published a paper, doesn't matter good journal, bad journal, because if it's a publication, I can go read it, right? And that is where sometimes it's unclear, did the student do the writing themselves, or did the professor really did most of the writing? But still, the fact that the student is part of a paper is something that is quantitative that I can go measure, and that matters. So, even if you have a small local conference and you have a proceedings article, make sure that gets known. The other thing I will say, it just occurred to me while talking to you all, is if it is published on the department's website, find out which faculty is the graduate program chair. Some departments publish that, some departments don't. And it is in your interest, particularly this time when fall has just started and it's far from the application timeline, that you I'm not saying send the SOP, because that will need to get tailored. Half the time, the thing is, I have done this, and it's like a Venn diagram. This department has faculty do this, and you don't want to send an identical email to 5 faculty members who are probably colleagues going out to have lunch, right? So the way you can do it, if you can write to the department chair or to the graduate committee chair, if that is published, and say, hey, I am a student with interest in blah and blah and blah. I have experience in blah and blah and blah. I am I'm very willing to expand my horizons to grow extra skills because I really want to work in this 2 fields. Now, researching the webpage, I found these are the 5 professors who might be a fit, but I don't know necessarily. Could you tell me who is hiring for next fall? Okay. So that is useful because the graduate admissions committee chair, whether or not he or she is hiring a student themselves, know that applicants are coming, right? That's your academic recruiter's equivalent, right?
Right.
So instead of badgering the 2 famous professors who might have a full group and not looking to hire, right? Why don't you have the person whose job it is to be the first person looking at all the applications, get under the notice of that person? Because it shows several things. One, you're professional enough to go to the department's webpage, find out who is the person whose job it is to look at graduate admissions. I don't mean the department secretary, because typically there'd be a secretary's name with it. I'm talking about the faculty member. Typically that position is called the graduate program coordinator or the graduations committee admissions chair, or sometimes if you cannot find it, it's just the departmental chair. But you're not trying to sell yourself. You just say, in my case, if I could go back 25 years ago and say, I am very interested in signal and image processing. I am good at MATLAB and other software platforms, having several years of college project experience. My GPA is blah. And these are the 5 faculty in your department whose interests match mine, but I don't know who is hiring. And before I email several faculty, because sometimes you will have just at the chair write back or write to the faculty. And you can say, I plan to email all these people, but I thought you could probably give me some insight on who is looking to hire and, is really looking for this kind of a fit.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a very good insight, because I did not do this, and I've never recommended anyone do this. So this is new for me as well. On the GRE perspective, if I may add a bit, I know for a fact that many universities. So let me tell a story about when I applied. So like I was saying, that when I went for an internship at a US university, which is actually also USC, and there was a similar panel discussion where there were three professors who they expressed their opinion one after the other. One of them said, "I just don't look at GRE. Because to me, GRE, the English, we just don't use that kind of English in scientific, language. The math is just too easy, and I mean, I don't care about what they get in GRE." Another professor, they said, "Exactly for this reason, I care very much about GRE, and because my research demands, very stringent, very accurate, like there is very little room to make mistakes. So I demand like full points in quantitative. If that's not there, pretty much that person is not in." The English as well, I think it's not as important probably, but I also give importance to that. So that was, in 2013. But most professors, at least at USC, what I've seen is that they don't give so much importance to GRE, including, I think, my advisor. Of course, like you said, then it should not be too low. However, today, officially, they have decided, like the entire department, and I think the entire engineering school, if I'm not wrong, they don't require GRE at all. So while there may be a box, if you have taken GRE, you can put in the score there, but you don't have to send scores officially through ETS and so on. And I think that's there is a trend that's actually being taken up by many universities across the US. So GRE, at least the general test, which is, in engineering, we don't have subject-specific tests like in physics or maths, which I think exists. So for those, I personally don't have an experience how important they still are, but the general GRE, I think, it has lost a lot of its shine, and at least for PhD applications. It's different for master's applications, which is not what we are discussing now. For PhD applications, I think it's not really important anymore. TOEFL, however, is very important and will stay important. It's required for anyone who is coming from a non-native English-speaking country. Right. So TOEFL, and I think the minimum, so this is written in many universities' webpage, so 100 is sort of the cutoff to get in. Some may be like 90 or 95, but 100 is kind of a safe score to target to get into any US school. If GRE is still relevant, I would say 320 is more than enough. Anything above that doesn't make a difference, whether it's 326 or 330 or 340 doesn't really make a difference. But yeah, like I said, at the moment, I think GRE general doesn't have much of an implication.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I am going to add something else that I realized because this is a JBNSTS forum. We have the honor and privilege of being JBNSTS scholars. Okay. And many people in the US don't know what JBNSTS is. It is worthwhile to educate in your SOP, in your CV, as well as if any of your letter writers is a JB scholar or can explain what being a JB scholar is, let that shine. Like there are equivalents in the US, look it up. I may be off, but this is where maybe some of the JBNSTS administrative people can help come up with equivalents. Like I think there's a Hertz scholarship in the US and other things like where you get a very prestigious competitive scholarship as an entry-level undergrad. Like look up what are the equivalents. And by the way, what I'm saying is as a US professor based in the US, but I saw some questions about COVID and visa situation and blah, blah, blah. I cannot comment on that. A, because it is way above my pay grade. And B, I genuinely do not know. And I would say if you want to hedge your bets, also look at Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and all the different places in Europe that I would not necessarily know. So if you want to hedge your bets, by all means, I think that's generally a good idea anyhow, right? Yeah, you can write acceptance rate of JBNSTS, but more than anything else, it is not so much about acceptance rate. I also feel like the whole JBNSTS interview process, all of that, that is the only test I have taken in my life before I became a researcher that tests my ability to do research.
Right. So I think what you're trying to say is if we have like a paragraph, right. And we should not be shy about that, in the sense that, we don't just write that we are a JBNSTS scholar, we explain what that means, saying that, it's like a 3-level examination procedure, and where, it's a written and then an interview process, and a third process where it's a closed book, it's a closed to world but open book process where we independently solve problems and explain that to a panel, and that's how we are selected essentially. So that's something that we need to tell, because that like you said, in some sense is maybe the first step towards solving a PhD problem.
Yes, exactly. So I have never, ever in my life taken a test that actually tested my ability to do research. And, anecdotally, one of my letter writers, incidentally, happened to be a very well-known mathematician who was my interviewer for my JBNSTS math project. He interviewed me and he loved how I had looked at the problem, and he became my voluntary mentor. It turned out that he lived near my neighborhood anyhow. He was never my classroom professor. He was from ISI, and he wrote a letter where the whole letter was, why on earth did he want to mentor me in the first place? Okay. And that was all about how I had solved the problem, how I look at mathematics, how I apply mathematics. It had zero input on my classroom performance because he never had me in a class, right? And when I came to UC, one of the first things my advisor, my master's advisor said was, who is this person? He wrote a very interesting and strange letter. We don't usually see letters like that, so we had to sit up and read it. So, I'm not saying, again, that has to be the norm, but I'm saying you have to figure out what is your shining point, and also have to figure out who are the people who can speak for the sides of you. And this is where, because you're JBNSTS scholars, I highly recommend, while you're still an undergrad, try to get in the attention of some senior JB scholar who's either in the US or in India, but significantly has US collaborators or has been in the US, so can write in that sense. Right.
Yeah, essentially, I think what's also coming out is, applications to US university is very non-standard. Like, it's very different from Indian higher education system, where you take a test, the higher your rank, you get, electronics, computer science, electrical, mechanical, etc. That does not work here. Right. So it's very different. And also, I guess we'll be answering one of the questions. It's very often that one could be working has an undergrad in a different major and then working in computer science. So they can have a major, let's say, in mathematics or electrical engineering. So these are actually very relevant to computer science. Even, let's say, if someone is applying to Professor Sen Gupta and worked in, let's say, mechanical engineering, with some fluid mechanics background, they may also have a chance of working, right? So that flexibility exists in US education system, and that needs to be taken advantage of. About mailing professors, like emailing professors beforehand, when I did the applications, right? Once again, like you said, the SOPs, they were probably, in my case, also very boilerplate. And when I sort of mentored someone else last year. I did not send my SOP. I was very ashamed to send that, so I told that person to write, and I, tailored that, and that came out to be really good, at least to me. Because so when I applied now regarding writing to professors beforehand, like emailing, what many people call pre-application emails. We also, like you also mentioned, we can write to, let's say, the department chair or the hiring, the admissions committee chair. When I did not write to these people, but I wrote to professors whom I wanted to work with. In the majority of the cases, I did not receive any reply. I wrote maybe maximum of 2 times, because that's the recommendation I got from other professors, that, don't bug professors, write once. If they don't reply, write again after 7 days. If they don't reply, don't write at all. So that's what I did. And in majority of the cases, I did not hear a reply. In the minority of the cases where I did receive a reply, it was that, yes, I encourage you to apply in December, and we'll be reviewing the applications in January, and you'll be hearing back from us at that point. So it was very generic, nothing really that I could get. The only things where I found were useful, where professors said, I'm not hiring next year. That's the only place that I knew it's not worth pursuing. So what that's again my perspective, what I tend to tell is, while I don't say don't write to professors, but I have also, for example, received admits from Purdue University, from UPenn, from Maryland, where I never heard professors from, but I applied to them and I got admits. So it's not, I think we should not restrict ourselves to places only where we hear from, because first of all, professors cannot necessarily say that they will take you for multiple reasons. One is that not entirely it's in their hands. It could be dependent on the admissions committee. Second is that they cannot say, because they'll, again, see all the files and then decide. So the best they can do is to encourage you to apply. So in my perspective, while it's good to be on the radar that, I'm applying and this is a good person, and that professor will possibly be receiving the file next year, it's possibly good not to stay away from not applying to places where they are really interested in, just because they never heard back from. And also there is this trend of saying this is an ambitious school, this is a moderate school, this is a safe school. In my opinion, every school is ambitious, and there is no safe school, because, like I said, I got an admit from UPenn, I got rejected from Penn State, I got rejected from many, many universities. I also applied to like 40 odd universities, and I got admitted from maybe 4 or 5. So, and I heard back from 2 professors from Yale saying that they literally said, your application will be taken seriously. But what I joked later to some other people, saying that when they took me seriously, they rejected me. Because
I had similar with Wisconsin, yes. They said, you're being considered for a fellowship, and then came the rejection letter. So it was like, why did you have to get my hopes up before you rejected? Yes, I understand.
Right. So I got rejected from Yale, where I heard back from 2 very well-known professors, but I got accepted from Purdue, where I never heard from anyone. I got accepted from UPenn and USC, of course, but at USC I had some contact. So that's my perspective. What's your take on that?
Yeah, so part of what happens is different departments, even if it's in the same field, have widely different cultures, widely different procedures and policies, and also size of the department matters. So I am willing to guess that the places where you send in an application blindly and got an admit are relatively big departments, would be my guess, because that is where, because there is enough faculty around, the graduate admissions committee, if they see a decent GPA, if they see that, the basic facts match up, are not going to, let an application slide, because constantly in a big department, at least you have brand new assistant professors joining who need to hire immediately, right? So it is also comes down to capacity, right? That matters.
Well, at least for Purdue, what I know indirectly, no one actually told me, but once I got the admit, I wrote back to the same professor whom I tried to get attention from. And they immediately responded saying that, I think you'll be getting a TA in the first semester. And then, if it works out, you'll get an RA. So what I realized was that internally they gave recommendation, even though they may or may not be in the admissions committee, but they gave the recommendation seeing at my file. So they know me that way, but they did not care about reading my pre-application email. So, this is also a very established professor. Why I didn't go there is a different reason, but different. I think it's also important to note that different universities and, like you said, different departments within the same university work differently. Like I know at USC, for example, it pretty much, if someone has research funds to give through RA, then it pretty much depends on the professor if they would want to recruit someone.
Yes, absolutely.
If it's through a fellowship, then that's different. Then the professor recommends it to the department and maybe to the university at which level the fellowship is being handled. And then that depends on the committee. But if it's through an RA, then in many places, it's up to just the individual professor. But in many places like MIT or Stanford, it's always through a committee. It's not through the individual professor. They can at best recommend, but it's up to the committee to decide.
Yeah, and this is also where different cultures are different. It's entirely possible some institutions might even have a policy that don't respond on your own to random emails from prospective, forward it straight to the graduate admissions chair. My department doesn't have that, but I can see some departments which are large enough. And this is where one of the things that we do in our department that I've already done, suppose a student writes to me and either I'm not hiring or the student clearly should not be applying to my area, but is otherwise interesting, I will forward it to my colleagues, or if I can't forward it, I'll just forward it to our graduate admissions committee chair, because he might see something in the students. Again, think of the graduate admissions committee chair as the academic recruiter. You're trying to direct. One of the things about pre-applications to individual established professors is that's like you want to actually work at Microsoft and you're looking up at LinkedIn's to the head of different Microsoft divisions and trying to write to them, when really you should be writing to their recruiting department where there are people whose job it is to try and match you with the right divisions, right? So there is that aspect of that. And the other thing is our impulse is to write to the senior established professors. And by all means, you should do that. But also keep in mind that people who are at the entry level, like just started assistant professors, they are the one who have to hire immediately because they have to start their group. Okay, so right across the spectrum, because a really senior professor may really like your resume, but maybe he or she is not growing their group or is in a place where they're only hiring postdocs right now because they're established. They already have 5 graduate students. They don't want to spend time in hiring a brand new one right now when they have, let's say, a grant ending. That's the other thing. When you're in this whole grant in, grant out, maybe they have a grant ending or a grant with 2 years left. And then you are thinking that, why don't I hire a postdoc to finish this grant right? And then next cycle I'll hire. Or maybe they are hiring 5 graduate students a year. It depends. But I'm saying with the established professors, there's a lot of diversity in what they want. Whereas assistant professors, they're starting typically with startup funds. They can max hire maybe 1 or 2 PhD students, and they have to hire PhD students because they are starting out, right? And so they are also desperate to hire, like you are desperate to get hired, right? And that is where probably a likelihood of response is also going to go up. I can tell you that I responded diligently to every student who emailed me a pre-app when I was just about to start at Iowa, because I was really needing to cast a very wide net across the planet to find the right PhD students as my first PhD students.
Right, right. And
now I'm selective, but that's different.
yeah, I'll just add a little bit and then probably we can answer some of the questions there. So I think there, like you also said, there is this dilemma of whether I should join an assistant professor. There is, of course, this this thought, oh, this professor doesn't have tenure. Very, very frankly speaking, everyone just openly, said, should I be joining that? And that happened for me as well. Like I was recommended, if I could avoid an assistant professor. I have graduated from an assistant professors group at USC, and I'm the first PhD student, so to speak. Not technically entirely right, but a first generation PhD student, let's say. And one thing that I have realized, what I've received from working with an assistant professor, is that the amount of time and passion and the commitment that you can receive. So the learning that you can get from an assistant professor, once that professor is even probably in their fourth or fifth year, sort of declines, because then the senior graduate student becomes sort of responsible to teach the junior PhD students. So if you are working with an assistant professor, if you have the opportunity to work with an assistant professor, I think that's a very good learning opportunity. And typically your productivity is also good, and your professor and you are more friends than it's not necessarily once a professor becomes established you don't become friends, but also probably because the ages are relatively closer.
Yes.
And the time that the professor can give and has to give to sort of establish their own career as well. Also, they don't have as much administrative duties at the beginning. So taking all of that, I had been involved in establishing the lab and whatnot. So that probably took a little longer to sort of finish my PhD than it could have if I had a ready lab. But the amount of knowledge that one could gain by working with a professor, the sort of relation that one can establish by working with an assistant professor, I'm sure, and I can see that with with my peers who work with other professors, that doesn't happen. Yeah. So, of course, working with an established professor has its own perks. Like, you kind of, if someone is really famous, then, you go to a conference and you sort of being asked about what you guys are working on and so on and so forth. You sort of go to a talk and you're known by your professor. But so those are there, but it also sort of grows for the assistant professor as well. So, one should not shy away, rather one should utilize these benefits that one can get by working with an assistant professor, I think.
Yeah, there's only one more thing I'll add to that. One of the fears is, what if the assistant professor doesn't make tenure? Then, does the group just disintegrate and the students are left in a lurch? I have never heard of students getting chucked out of a department because their advisor didn't make tenure. Because typically some committee member will take in the student, or they'll figure out how the student can graduate, if nothing else, if not with a PhD, at least a master's degree or some graduate degree. So I have not any direct experience among my peers who did not make tenure, but knowing just, academic culture, you have to understand that not just the professor, but the department makes a huge investment when they bring in a graduate student. So particularly a graduate student who has done good research, is not a dud, has done good research. Losing that graduate student does not look good for the department and its graduate program, because that would show that the graduate program does not care for its graduate students. Okay.
Right.
So I would be startled if the professor not making tenure means that the student cannot graduate. Typically, the student would get handed off to committee members.
Right. I think this is also where there's a distinction of, although I think it's in the US, we typically refer to as professors as boss. Although I personally don't like to do that, but that's kind of the typical jargon that's being used, just because they tend to pay a good amount of money at some point or the other. But it must be distinguished that the PhD student belongs to the department. So they are doing the PhD, they are part of the department, so they are not bound to the professor, they are bound to the department, they are students of the department. So the department has that obligation to cater to the needs. So they are PhD students of the program that's offered by the department. It's different for postdocs. So that's something that, so like you were saying, whatever might happen to a professor, even if a professor passes away, then the PhD students can continue, if they wish, their program in the department. Maybe their research will change to some extent, but they can still get their degree.
Exactly.
All right, so I think we are
running out of time here,
close, so we can probably quickly go through some of the questions. One of the questions was that if these would also apply to masters. I would say many of these won't. In fact, some of them, for example, GRE, GPA, they may be different because at least at USC, what I can say is that the master's applicants are handled by an entirely different committee, and they are not necessarily faculty members always. I mean, very few, and they are more research or academic administrators who accept, at least do the first filing of the master's program. So that's a very different application. Then
can I add one thing there? Yes. Though? So one of the things, master's versus PhD, I'm going to let you into a little bit of a secret, not so much of a secret really, but typical research grants are 3-year grants, and they are meant to support PhD students. And typically, the grant would either get renewed or get followed on by another 2 to 3-year grant that would help the student finish their PhD. So at the hiring level, there is always a preference of sorts given to a student who's going to stick around for the PhD and not get a quick master's and leave. Because honestly, by the time the student is coming up to speed, that takes 1 to 2 years anyhow, and that is exactly the time frame of a master's. So there is not enough return of investment to the professor to take on a master's student on their research grant. However, if it's a large department which gives out a lot of TAs, and then you have a senior faculty member who has a gazillion graduate students and postdocs and is a grant ending and could use an extra hand, then they can take on a master's student. And that is where between, TAs in the department, as well as just, grant is ending, like, my PhD student is graduating 1 year before the grant ends. So for that last year, I'm looking for a master's student to fill that position because I don't want to hire a PhD student with only 1 year of funding in the bank. So those are typical cases where a professor would take on a master's student. But you should be aware of this kind of financial calculations that happen between master's and PhD when you apply.
Right. Also, I think, if I'm not wrong, in the case that you mentioned where they would hire, let's say, for the last year of the grant, in that case, maybe the master's student could be funded. But in the majority of the cases across US schools, master's students, their tuition are unfunded, as well as they don't get stipend. So that's definitely a big distinction between masters and
yes. I don't take on a master's student if I cannot fund the student, but that's my personal ethics. Like, I don't want to bring somebody on and expect them to pay graduate level tuition. That said, I know students who pay graduate level tuition. They are US students. But yes, that's one of the things. It's very difficult to get funding to get a master's degree for that reason.
Right. So someone asks, is it necessary to have an undergraduate or MS thesis publication?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
I mean, based on what we talked about, just nuggets to see, are we capable of technical writing? Are we capable of research? And however you may put it, it doesn't hurt, but it also depends upon the quality of the paper. What you don't want to do is dump some thought process into some local conference that makes it a really bad publication. And then you say, okay, check the box. It's not about that. Right. But if you have something good, then you should highlight it.
Right. Someone asks, does good ranks in different Indian national level exams make an important point in CV while applying abroad? I guess what they might be referring to is if they have, so I think, let's say in joint entrance examination for IITs or West Bengal, if that still exists, I don't know. So in my perspective, if I might say something, so I think that may make sense, but that needs to be put in perspective. Even for professors who may have been in India a long time back, what your rank currently means needs to put in perspective. In that sense, I mean, it may or may not matter that much, I think. What do you think?
So for me, actually, it mattered again because I was from a non-IT background and had no idea how to write a SOP, right? So part of how I convinced that professor to write back to me is, I ranked in Madhyamik High Secondary Joint Entrance and I was a JB scholar, right? So I basically I ranked blah, blah, blah out of so many 100,000 in each of these. And basically said, I know I'm not from an IIT, but from these above numbers, you can tell I'm good. So why didn't you test me? That was my arrogant email, which apparently landed me the job. But so, you have to understand people crunch numbers. And so even if they are not verifiable, it is good to point out so long as you're being truthful and try to see if those numbers can be given in your letters.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So essentially a perspective, like a comparison needs to be made, just not the number, but how that stands out, that needs to be shown. Right. And I think I also did something similar. I also showed how Jalapur University is, like how important it is in the Indian research scenario and educational scenario, something like that. I did
the burden is on the applicant to show that their institution, their pedigree of training and their academic readiness is good. Yeah. Right.
So I think there are a bunch of questions. Is IISER, TIFR, Shivpur, IISc known among your colleagues?
So it depends on which colleague. I obviously know all of them. By the way, I have one other, a very senior faculty member who is also from Jadavpur. But then, it's a dart, right? So what I would say, refrain your question. Assume people may not know and then make it your job to educate them that they know. Like part of what you can even write as your SOP, that I have had the privilege of getting my academic training at a premier institution like blah, 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 which ranks so-and-so in the Indian list of institutions or something like that, right?
Right.
And this is where, again, the letter writers, I feel frustrated that the letter writers don't do their due diligence because they can really educate the institution in a way that the student cannot. But I digress.
Right. So I think what's coming out multiple times is this letter thing. And from a JBNSTS, perspective, what I also felt during my undergrad, and that's why we feel we'll try to do this, is to have JBNSTS scholars get a better exposure while they are undergrads to potential US, professors or professors at US universities, so that they can get an internship opportunity and also get a letter of recommendation that's considered valid by other places. So there is nothing. It's just a thought so far, but we'll try to make that work. And if that works, then I think that would be really nice. So another question, speaking of research experience, do internships or projects of a couple months suffice to earn a good letter of recommendation? I think it doesn't matter for the time frame. What matters is what he said, is whatever work has been done needs to be portrayed in the right light to show that the person has the qualities that one would look at in a researcher. Of course, the more relationship one has with the specific person, if that's a positive relationship, then that builds to that. but it's not necessary is what I think, right?
Right. I agree completely.
So what else? A student joins to work with the faculty on a certain topic, but ends up working on a subtopic the faculty has not worked on earlier. Does that turn out to be a problem later during PhD work?
I would say that's a blessing, because one of the issues you're going to immediately run into post-PhD is crawl out of your PhD advisor's shadow.
Yeah.
So honestly, it really depends upon your relationship with your PhD advisor. I actually push all my PhD students that when you came in for the first 2 years, I tell you what to do. The last 2 years of your PhD, you should be telling me what you are doing. So, and if you can't do that, it means you're not an independent thinker yet. And I will give you a hard time in your defense. And I live up to that promise. So finally, my students are telling me what things I don't know, which is great.
I see. Now, someone else asks, if one does MS in a theoretical topic and wants to work in an experimental topic for PhD, does it change of fields? I don't see it's a change of field, but sort of change of perspective or the kind of work. Does that become a problem?
That is highly individual. It again depends upon who is going to be your PhD advisor. Is it the same person? Typically not. And then how do you transition? In my case, I actually did my master's thesis in a completely different topic. And then I changed into a different topic for my PhD. And then it was a random course of events. So unfortunately, I cannot give any insight as it's so individual.
Right. Does having a publication as an undergraduate make a difference to PhD applications? I would say yes. It's like also Professor Sen Gupta said, like it's a quantitative measure that you have been able to accomplish several things. You've been a part of the research and written it up, and it has been accepted by the scientific community, peer reviewed. So it gives like a quantitative feel to whatever you say in your SOP and the rest of your CV. However, it's probably not an absolute necessity. It definitely strengthens your profile to a good extent, but it's not absolutely necessary. In my case, I had a paper submitted, but anyone can submit a paper, but it was not accepted at that point. But I did have a conference poster essentially, and luckily I had the best poster award for that. So maybe that helped. So anything that you can, essentially just try to take any opportunity you have and do the best in that. Having too many publications, I think, is also not good. Like I know of a certain department at Jalliff University, and at least during our times, they started publishing more than PhD students typically do. So they had like 10 publications during application for a PhD, even written book chapters. So
what?
Yes. So I think that's too much. In fact, one of my friends, he later told me that, this person, I don't know how right or wrong this is, but this person did not get into many US universities because they felt that this person neglected his, coursework and what he's supposed to do primarily as an undergrad, and put too much time on what he was not supposed to do. And a lot of times what happens, I know for a fact that for example, there are you have friends who are working on a different project, and you give their names in your paper and they give your name in this paper, and that's how you build the number of papers. In my opinion, that's not a good thing at all. One, it's definitely ethically not correct. Second, when you get interviewed by the professor, they honestly don't read the papers as such, but they want you to explain the papers. So if at that point it's obvious that your contribution to the paper is not does not warrant the authorship to that paper, then that's more negative than any positive that you may thought have gotten by adding that name of the paper to your CV. So 1 or 2 papers are definitely good if they are your own.
Yes.
That necessarily doesn't mean always first author paper, but like second, third author papers are good. But having 20 papers is also not necessary.
Yeah, that is very sage advice, Debarghya. So I heartily second that. And one last thing I'll say, you can actually take advantage of all these virtual conferences that are happening because of COVID. Because like I am needing to upload my presentations to IEEE Explore, right? And I see that as a unique advantage because if for whatever reason you're in an IEEE, even a student conference, and this pandemic gives you the opportunity to upload a video thing that is citable, that's great at multiple levels because then a professor can, all of us has access to IEEE Explore. You know, we can go and actually see a student present their work, they're owning their work. We can see if the students, you know, can present in articulate English and all of that. So it is the next best thing to a real interview. I'm not saying everybody has to do that, but I'm saying in the unique times we live in, this can be turned into lemonade this way.
Right. Like take advantage of whatever situation it is. Does a PhD applicant need to write research proposal to be submitted along with the application? I don't think so.
No.
Do you, ma'am, this is directly for you. Do you accept Indian undergraduate students for summer projects or MS thesis projects? If yes, what qualifications do you look for in them? Also, are foreign internships during undergraduate necessary for getting a PhD abroad?
So I can give actually very concrete yes/no answers to this. I cannot accept foreign students just for a summer simply because there is no budget line to support that. Even if I get the best student in the planet wanting to come spend a summer with me, there is no legal way for me to fund that student. I will obviously never say no to a student who shows up with their own airfare and their money and cost of living. I don't think that's what you mean, because all the grants, all the budget in the grants is meant for students in the US, not US citizens, but, you know, students who are in a US graduate program. That's what the money is for. So I have no way I can pay a student who's showing up for a summer from another country. So, and I'm pretty sure same for my colleagues. Now, for a master's, again, as I said, you know, if I have grants which require US citizenship because they're military grants, I have grants where I have the freedom to hire wherever I want from the planet. So that is where I would basically say that get in touch with me offline and I will see what your skills are, if there's a match in positions I am looking to hire, etc. I'm open-minded between MS and PhD because I have a series of grants, some ending, some starting, but it comes down to fit. So just get in touch with me offline.
Right. What if the funding is arranged by KVPY and myself? I think, like, in that case, someone should mention that, you know, we have funding, and if one can arrange for just the opportunity, then that'll be great. Is that so?
Yeah, I mean, basically nobody would say no to, you know, free labor and talent, but also the other thing is probably the person will still have to make phone calls to make sure this is legal to do because the whole visa landscape is changing so fast. So if somebody writes to me with that, I would say, okay, I'll look into it, and then I'll give our international students office a call to say, is this even feasible?
Right. So I think we can, if you have some ending comments, we can listen to that. Else we can, you know, wrap up the session here. We're already more than over the time that we thought of.
Right.
If there are more questions, I think, you know, we'll probably have to email us and we'll try to answer them by that. But we have to, for the sake of many other things, we have to wrap it up here. Thank you, Professor Sen Gupta, for taking your time to give your opinion about the applications to US universities. And thank you, everyone, for your time and listening to us. Have a good day, good morning, good afternoon, good night. And keep an eye for other events that have already been scheduled. And, you know, you'll get notifications in due time. So we'll hope to see you again soon in some other events. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Debarghya, for organizing this. I'm going to add only one last thing because it's so late, particularly for Debarghya, is if for some reason you felt your question was not answered because we ran out of time, feel free to reach out offline and we will try our best to answer it. At least I will. I don't want to volunteer, Debarghya, but because you've been, you're so full of initiative, I think you'd probably reply as well.
Yeah, I try to. Yeah, okay. Thank you. So yeah, like Professor Sen Gupta said, please reach out to us by email or Slack, and we'll try to help you.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.